Okay, and I think we are live. At least I hope we are. Let me just check that I have sound. I was just trying to look to see if this was on. So let me just double check. Yeah, we are. Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome back. Welcome to another episode with me, Dr. Sylvia. Welcome to Ask Away Health. I hope you guys are doing very well. Tonight, we are looking at fibroids and fasting. What's the connection? It's long overdue, this subject. I was asked about this several months ago, and the plan was to sort of do a proper sit-down video so I could have some graphics and put all sorts of things together, but it just kept dragging. So I thought the best thing is probably to just sit down and, put some of the thoughts I've gathered around this subject on a live stream. And then we could look at it together, ask questions, talk about it, and so on. So welcome if you're joining. I really appreciate that. Please give this video a like. And of course, consider subscribing to the channel. Here in Ask Away Health, we talk about everything related to women's health, sexual health. I'm a consultant in general practice, and I really enjoy what I do. So let's begin. We are talking about fibroids and fasting. Let me just have a quick look at my notes. Okay, just make sure that I cover all the different things that I've put together for this session. Okay, so as people who click on this stream, I presume will know you want to find out about fibroids, so you know a little bit about fibroids already, but let's just set the stage, provide a little bit of background. What are fibroids? They are benign growths of the womb and the most common gynecological condition in women, really, because 1 in 3, according to research, 1 in 3 women have fibroids. They are that common, but of course not every woman knows she has fibroids. Many of us have fibroids that don't affect us, don't cause any problems. The ones you hear about are the ones that cause problems, and so symptoms like irregular menstrual bleeding, pelvic pain, constipation, trouble with passing urine or bladder problems. In a very small proportion of women, it might also cause or bring around issues to do with fertility. Now, we don't know what causes fibroids to date. We don't know exactly what causes fibroids. The way you could say what causes hepatitis B, then we will say, oh, it is an infection with the hepatitis B virus. So we know the cause directly. For fibroids, we can't say the same. What we do know is that there are associations. And of course, one of the strongest that you would know about or you would have heard of is that is related to hormone imbalance, particularly referencing the hormones estrogen and progesterone. But that alone doesn't explain it, which is why we say we don't know exactly what happens or what causes fibroids, because there are some women that will have irregular hormone balance, but they don't have fibroids, while there are some that don't have obvious imbalances, but they have fibroids. So it's what we say is multifactorial. So there is more than one thing associated with it. We also know that things like age come into play. So fibroids start to happen in a woman's when a woman is within her childbearing years. So you tend to see it more in sort of very, very late 20s, early 30s onwards, by which I mean that you're more likely to find it in an older woman compared to a younger woman. So if I had a group of 100 20-year-olds in one corner, yes, you might find some that have fibroids, but very few, compared to if I had 100 women in their 60s on the other corner. You're more likely to have fibroids in many, many more of that group of women. So that's how it's age is related. Of course, your family history and genetics. So you may find that in a family, sisters or mom, cousins or aunties may also have fibroids. There's also ethnicity. We know that this is a condition that affects Africans, African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans very, very much compared to other ethnicities. Not saying that you don't have fibroids in Asians, in Europeans, in Caucasians, and so on, but Blacks, particularly those of African American and Afro-Caribbean heritage, seem to suffer from fibroids to a larger extent. And again, the question is why? What is it about the ethnicity, what is it about that background that brings fibroids more in that group of people. So, you know, you would of course agree with me that there's so many more studies that we need to do into fibroids, relating to cause, relating to, you know, why do you find it in this particular group, or is there any link with this particular type of food, and so on. Lots more studies that we need to do. Of course, that dovetails us into another association with fibroids. So if you're just joining, I'm just looking at a bit of a background about fibroids, what is related in terms of causing fibroids. I'm just going through a list. We've talked about age, genetics or family history, ethnic background or race, and we've talked about African American, and Afro-Caribbean, sort of carrying the bulk of the weight in terms of the occurrence of fibroids. Being overweight, being obese is also associated with fibroids, and that's related to diet. And I'm not going to look too much into diet today per se. I've got another video actually coming up targeting fibroids and food, which hopefully should come out in a couple of weeks, but today's focus really is on fasting. Then there's environment, and by environment, I'm talking about endocrine disrupting, what's EDCs now? Endocrine disrupting chemicals, which occur in so many different types of everyday domestic, household, cosmetic products, and so on. You have to really look very, very carefully, learn about the bisphenols and phthalates and things that you should avoid in your personal products or in your household products, because there has been a link between these chemicals and developing not just fibroids, many different inflammatory conditions. And there's also possibly an association between fibroids and stress, some kind of stress, maybe stress at birth, or some issues to do with development. You know, I've just been saying that there is a lot to say about more studies to look into this. So stress growing up, babies exposed to stress in the mom's womb, and perhaps linked to having fibroids later on in life. So these are areas of focus that studies will be very much welcome. Hello, Tejiri Buebu, and thank you so much for being here. Actually, yours is one of the comments that pushed me to do this live stream. So you're very, very much welcome to the stream. Thank you for joining. And hopefully we can have some of your questions answered. And before I go any further, I think it's also important to say that there isn't any straightforward answer to this. And people who have been thinking about fibroid and its treatment that is not the conventional medicine or surgery will, for us to be really, really honest with ourselves, that there is no one easy, straightforward answer that bangs the nail on the head. There are some studies that tell you certain things. There are other studies that say something else. And so you're having to sort of think which best applies to me, which can I tolerate. In all of these treatments and in the stories that you're hearing, there's individual variability. So what does that mean? Not all of us will experience something to the same degree. So somebody might tell you, hey, try this, it really was good for me. You may not have the same effect. And there's nothing wrong with you per se or with the other person. It's just that we all have differences, individual variations. So you've got to bear that in mind when you're making that judgment. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about fibroids, what they are. So if somebody hasn't heard of fibroids before, hopefully with my little brief, you would understand it better. So now let's look at fasting. And so the question that we're asking ourselves now is, what happens to the body during fasting? What are the benefits and the risks? So I want us to think about that now. Fasting is clearly when you're restricting food or energy or calories. So when you're not eating food, and there are different types of fasts. Dry fast when you don't eat anything at all. Water fasting when you don't eat any food, but you can have some amount of water at some point during the period of the fast. Intermittent fasting when you are without food for certain hours of the day, and then for another designated period, then you're allowed to eat. So there are different types of fasting, but generally when you're fasting, what happens? So there are different things going on in the body. There's something called ketosis. Ketosis is a metabolic process. Because you've been starving the body of its usual glucose that you get from the food that you eat directly, the body then faces the fat that is stored and starts to burn that down instead. So that is one of the things that happens in ketosis. Another thing that happens during fasting is the body cleans out damaged cells, we think, by the process of fasting, so that it can generate new or healthier cells. So it's something called autophagy that the body is involved in. So, and the reason I'm bringing that in is because we're trying to look at the possible basis for fasting being of benefit in treating conditions like fibroids. So some scientists think that during fasting, this autophagy happens, which is the body clearing out damaged cells in order to create newer, healthier cells. So another thing that happens with fasting is that hormone balancing, hormone modulation. So it may be that during a fast, the body is able to repair an imbalance in some hormones during the fast. I didn't find specifically which ones might be affected, but there is some room to think that as the processes of ketosis are happening, as you're restricting yourself from eating certain types of foods, processed foods and all that, your body has the chance to balance some hormones. So that is one aspect that you may benefit from fasting. That's something that happens when you're fasting that you might benefit from. Of course, weight loss. Weight loss is a big one. So you would lose weight because, like we just said, you're burning fat, so you're going to lose weight. You might also find that inflammation is reduced. Inflammation, we know, or chronic inflammation in particular, is something that we feel is responsible for many types of disease conditions. We're talking about cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure. We know that there are certain things going on in the body, but we think that on a cellular level, there's also tissue inflammation that's contributing to those events that leads to chronic disease. So fasting could be something that reduces inflammation. And in the same way, it might also help to balance. We talked about trying to balance hormones. It may also contribute to reducing stress. So there are quite a few things that potentially fasting could provide benefits to. And I say this with a caution because fasting is not for everybody. Fasting needs to be supervised. If you dive into a fast and say, I'm not going to eat anything for XY number of days, that is excessive, you're going to be sick, very ill. So it's not something to just dive without thinking and planning carefully, certainly without proper supervision. So, so those are some of the potential benefits of fasting. Some authorities believe it might help to reduce the risk of conditions like type 2 diabetes or heart conditions and so on. However, I also need to mention, because I found this reference in a study, that they looked at a meta-analysis. They put together a group of different studies and tried to see on average, what are these studies telling us about fasting and its effect on these conditions. And they said that particular big study suggested there was no impact of fasting, like intermittent fasting, on blood pressure and glucose levels. So this is something I want to really pull in your ear, because this is what we find in the medical community, that you may have a group of people that have a particular opinion and believe this is what we think. We've done our studies. This is what we think. X has this effect. On the other hand, another group of people in the same medical community will do their own research and say, no, actually, this doesn't have that effect. And so you have two different lines of thought, and you now have to wonder what's responsible for the difference, because which should we go with? And to be honest with you, that is where we are with a lot of these things. Either we don't have enough studies, or we have two different lines of thought, and you can't really make a concrete decision as a result. Okay, so we've looked at the benefits. Let us have a look at let's have a look at the risks. I think it's useful to balance the discussion and say that if you're fasting, if you're not doing it right, if you're doing it excessively, if you're not even supposed to be fasting, you may experience side effects, feeling unwell, experiencing headaches, tiredness, constipation. You might develop excessive weight loss. You might find that if you're doing intermittent fasting, you might overeat and indulge in unhealthy food during your eating window. So if you're doing the 16-8 intermittent fast, for example, what you might find is that because you're maybe not prepared for it, or you're not mentally ready, whichever the case, you find that you've effectively starved yourself for 16 hours. And when it comes to the 8 hours, you think, right, you're ready now, and you think that's the time to wolf so much down. But that's not the point. The point is, even though that is your eating window, you are still supposed to eat healthily. You're still supposed to eat with moderation. And it is not an excuse to put in excessive amounts of unhealthy food into that 8-hour window because you've starved yourself for 16 hours. So that could be one effect that that's a clear example of somebody who is not carrying out their intermittent fasting properly. It's not going to work, and it could be very harmful. Okay. What else? It could, people with certain medical conditions or health conditions, or they're taking certain medication, people who have eating disorders, people who are elderly, pregnant, breastfeeding, or trying to have a baby. Those individuals are at greater risk if they're undergoing a fast, so they should not. Fasting is not for them, or if at all, it has to be very well regulated with their medical practitioner or dietitian to help to identify what is appropriate for them to be eating. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to give this video a like, and of course, a comment or question, very much welcome. Let me know your thoughts. I know that we have different ideas around fasting and fibroids. Please let me know what you think. So we've looked at the benefits, we've looked at the effects of fasting and fibroids. We've looked at what fasting does in the body, really. So I think this is a good place to sort of, address the question. These effects, how potentially could they affect fibroids? So specifically, I'm looking at, now we've said that fibroids could have some effect on weight control, inflammation, and so on. Potentially, how could this affect fibroids? So remember that we said that fibroids is associated with being overweight. What we said was that being overweight increases the risk of fibroids. Now, not every overweight woman has fibroids, of course. So when we say associated with, it just means that when you look at the numbers, okay, you're going to find more women with fibroids who are overweight than who are not. But it doesn't mean that directly every single overweight woman has fibroids. So let's just be careful with that definition. So if a woman who is overweight is more likely to have fibroids, it makes sense that if she loses weight, it reduces her risk of developing fibroids. It might even help to reduce the fibroids that she has, or shrink, or even control the symptoms. So that is one way that fasting potentially, so that's an indirect effect of the fibroids, of the fasting on the fibroids, because it helps with weight control. If it's done properly, if it's done in a supervised manner, it is safe, and you're losing weight in a healthy, steady fashion. That can actually help in managing the fibroids, because we know that being overweight is linked to fibroids. So that's one way. And then I said it also helps to regulate hormones. We're not exactly sure how that happens in terms of the regulation of hormones, which hormones in particular, but you're eating more healthy. You're probably eating less amounts of unhealthy foods when you're fasting. We talked about how the body is able to get rid of dead cells and grow newer cells. So that change in the body, that change in the makeup of the body, which fasting creates, may also contribute to reducing the risk of fibroids developing. So it's helping to regulate hormones. Could it help to balance out estrogen and progesterone that are already implicated in fibroids growth? That's possible. Could it help with inflammation? Yes, we've said that. We know that fibroids, one of the issues around, or ways that it develops, we know is because of some free radicals, oxidative processes going on, that is inflammation. We know somehow that is linked to how fibroids develop. What goes into it, we're not 100% sure, but we know that there's some link to that. There's some thoughts that fasting could help to remove that effect. So yes, there's a potential that it could help to manage fibroids. So fasting effect on weight control, on helping to balance hormones, relieving inflammation. That could all help in preventing or shrinking fibroids or managing the symptoms. But again, I want to remind you of this thing known as individual variation. And this thing known as individual variation is it's really important when you sit down and watch a video on YouTube here, or you read something, or somebody comes and tells you, hey, try fasting, it will do this, it will do that, or the other. Now, how should you take that news? I think you should be open. I'm a very, I encourage a lot of searching for health information, doing your own research, getting information from reputable sources. I encourage that a lot. I encourage asking questions from different sources so that you have a balanced picture. You can make the right decision. Is it going to work for you? Nobody can really tell until you actually decide to try it out. There are some people who don't want to have surgery. They don't want to take any medication for fibroids, and their choices are respected. If you want to go into fasting, the sensible thing to do is to look at the process. Could it potentially have any harmful effects for you? And I've told you a list of people whom it could. So if you're in that category, you shouldn't be fasting. You should at least speak to your doctor and say, these are my concerns, these are my questions. Is there a safe way for me to do this? And your doctor might want to discuss that with you or refer you to a dietitian so you're doing it safely. If you're not in those category of people, and then you want to go about fasting, then you need to look at, okay, what potentially could happen if I am going to fasting? How long am I going to do this for? And what should I expect? Again, have that discussion with your doctor, because we will respect your wish if you don't want to have medication or surgery for, whatever reason. But if you want to go into fasting as a process, then it has to be done in a safe fashion. It is true. There are some stories, I've read some stories just as you, I've watched videos just like you, where somebody says, I was diagnosed with fibroids, I went on a fast for XY amount of time, and this is my outcome. And that's their story, all well and good. Will that be your story? I don't know. Nobody can tell you that. What we can say definitively is, we don't have any evidence that says that whether it's water fasting or intermittent fasting alone will shrink fibroids. We don't have any evidence in that regard. You might say to me, well, Dr. Sylvia, maybe it's because they haven't done those studies. Fair enough. Or maybe it's because people researchers are not interested in those kind of studies because of money issues. You can have that argument. That's not a problem. We're not stopping you from going into the fast if you want to. We're telling you based on the information that we have at hand, that scientifically at this point, we don't have enough information to say that if somebody has 10 centimeter or 7 to 10 centimeter fibroids and they're having heavy bleeding, going on a water fast alone is going to shrink those fibroids. There's no medical evidence to support that. If the person is healthy, if the person is otherwise well, and under supervision of their doctor, they want to go down the route of a supervised fast, where it is clear that they're taking in at least an amount of calories that will not keep them, but that will not put them in harm's way, where they're not restricting calories for a prolonged period of time, and they're keeping in touch with their practitioners. Is it something reasonable to try? Why not? Okay, as long as it's supervised and you're making sure that you're not causing any more harm to yourself, it's something that if it's a process you want to undergo, then of course it's something that people can consider. So we have no evidence, okay? And I just want to keep saying it. Extreme fasting can deprive your body, okay? It could cause complications, and that's why I'm sounding it over and over again. If people have certain conditions, they shouldn't even try it. So pregnant women, elderly people, heart conditions, somebody who has type 2 diabetes with complications and so on, should avoid fasting. Any type of restriction of meals or diet that they're considering should be discussed with their practitioner. But on the other hand, a balanced diet, looking at a diet that is rich in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins. Now, that would help overall health. That can promote weight loss as well. And that will also help to cut down stress, inflammation, even help to promote hormone balance. So that is something that I would really strongly suggest that, you consider, because fasting is one option. And, you might want to think, fasting will just blast everything. We don't have any of that evidence that fasting goes to blast fibroids. There's nothing like that we have seen scientifically. Okay, so now let's look at, so I've sort of set the stage with looking at fibroids, looking at what fasting does, and then what are the potential effects. So I've looked at it from both sides, that yeah, fasting could have some benefits, but there are also some concerns when it comes to fasting. So let me pull up some of the questions that prompted this discussion. And, I'm so glad that, one of the persons who asked the question is on the stream. So they said, strong relationship. So they wanted us to look at a strong relationship connection between dry fasting for 18 hours and bleeding fibroid shrinkage. Well, just trying to put this thing together, these words together. I think this person is asking, is there a strong connection between dry fasting for 18 hours plus, so a type of intermittent fasting where you're not eating for 18 hours and then your window is 6 hours, and shrinking fibroids or managing bleeding? Like I've just said, there is no strong evidence that this type of fasting will alone will directly shrink fibroids or stop fibroid symptoms like heavy bleeding. There is no medical evidence, but I can see some benefits in terms of affecting the weight, especially if it's done in a supervised fashion. If the fasting is where you're not just restricting and not eating the right food during the 6 hour window, whatever type of intermittent fasting, if you're not eating the right foods during the 6 hour window, because if you're eating processed foods can contribute towards fibroid growth. Processed foods, sugar, salt, all this will contribute towards the growth of fibroids. So you really need to be looking at the type, the quality of food you're eating. So it's quality and quantity that are the key terms here. So while I would not agree that there is a big relationship connection, because we just don't know. We don't have those studies. We have stories of people who say, yes, I had fibroids, I did fasting for this number of days, and bam, my fibroids shrank, bam, the bleeding stopped. If it happens for them, we can't say it's going to happen for every single person, thanks to individual variation. We don't know what else was going on, and we don't know what was particularly in line responsible for their fibroids, different to your experience. So these are different things to think about. So that's that question. I've got the second one here. So somebody says, yeah, pretty much the title of my video, fasting and fibroids, what's the connection? So this is what I'm talking about. The connection is that fasting can help with weight loss. Fasting potentially could help with hormone balance. Fasting potentially could help with managing inflammation. And these are things that we associate with developing fibroids, but not them alone. So many different things. I mentioned your ethnic background. I mentioned your family history. I mentioned age. I mentioned being overweight. All these things also play into fibroids. I mentioned endocrine disrupting chemicals. And that's really important. And we're finding out more about this in the last few years, how relevant these things are, because these are chemicals that are used when manufacturing the things we use every day, whether it's plastics or whether it is the cosmetics we use in our hair or that we use in our body cream and so on. And so we need to be conscious of these things. And especially if you have fibroids or some other kind of chronic condition, be conscious of the potential for these things to affect your health. So what's my bottom line on this? If you're somebody with fibroids and you are so convinced that you don't want to have conventional treatment, you don't want to take medication, you don't want a myomectomy, if you still want to have children, or if you're past childbearing age, you don't want to have a hysterectomy, if these are the options that have been offered to you, fair enough, and you don't want them. Can you consider fasting? You can certainly consider fasting. I would not go ahead and say to you it's going to definitely get rid of your fibroids. I don't know. Because if you go about it in a supervised way, in a healthy fashion, so that you're not being made ill, potentially you might gain some benefits, because there are some in instances where fasting does provide benefits. We've talked about weight loss and we've talked about other things there. So you may find it improves your symptoms. You may find you may find that it also introduces you to a new way of eating, a new, change in your lifestyle, your habits. You might be cutting down on different things, cutting down on certain types of alcohol like beer, which we know is associated with fibroids, cutting down on smoking, cutting down on different things, and sort of having a healthier lifestyle. And that could very well impact the development of fibroids. So it's something to think about if you're so inclined. At present, we have different options apart from surgery. There is uterine fibroid embolization, and other measures that are being used for treating fibroids. And it's worthwhile sitting down with a doctor and thinking about what are the different options available. So that's what I have to say about this particular subject. And I wanted to come on this live stream. I didn't want it to be too long so that you're not exhausted from listening for over 30 minutes to what I have to say about fibroids and fasting and the connection. I would love to hear from you guys what you think, what you've heard, so that we can explore them and see, is there any truth to this? Well, thank you so much for listening, guys. Please check out the latest videos I have on the channel. I do a lot of different varieties. I know some may not apply, but it may apply to somebody that you know. So even if it's not something that you think is relevant to you at this time, please share it with a friend or two. They may find it useful. But I do really appreciate all your support on the channel, your engagement, your comments, responding to the quizzes on the community post. Thank you so much for being part of what we're doing, helping me to grow the channel. And I always like to hear back from you. If you need to contact us to ask any specific questions about a health condition, don't do it in the comment section. We're not going to respond to that because we can't do that on that platform. You can come onto the website, askawayhealth.org. And then there's a facility for you to send a question. We can sort of look at things in a little bit more detail to provide you with some guidance. So guys, thank you so very much. Hello to Prophetic VIP TV. Good evening to you. Welcome. I'm just rounding up, but it's good to have you here. And I hope that if you watch on the replay, you find this information useful. Thank you so much again, guys. I hope you have a great week ahead, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.